Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
A warm good morning to one and all present here. I welcome our director, Dr. A.V. Alex, head of the department, Mrs. Divya PB, speaker of the day, Mr. Vinu Alex, my colleagues, our students to this webinar. This webinar is organized in association with the Software Freedom Day. Software Freedom Day, SFD, was established in 2004. This is an annual worldwide celebration of free and open source software. This is a public education effort with the aim of increasing awareness of free software and its virtues and encouraging its use. Free softwares are free to use, free to study, free to distribute, free to modify, free to access, and it's all about sharing. We are very privileged to get the resource person of today, Mr. Vinu Alex, currently working as Staff Cloud Native Architect at VMware. He is a hands-on technocrat with 19 plus years of experience in large-scale solution design, technical consulting, leading technology advocacy engagements, technology evangelism, practice building, system administration, and entrepreneurship. He is an acclaimed speaker at various international events and meetups. He has also worked in Red Hat, Wipro Technologies, HP, and C Network. He has many volunteer experiences, many certifications, and has won many awards. We are fortunate enough to have such a truly unique person. Once again, I welcome you all to this webinar on open source software, use, learn, contribute, and share. And this won't be complete until I extend a word of thanks to Mrs. HOD, Mrs. Divya PB, Lee Juliet George, Faculty Coordinator, students Joel P. Jacob, and Vishak Vijay Kumar for their support in this event. Thank you all. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Vinu Alex for the talk.
Thank you, Rins Madam, for that wonderful introduction. So I hope all of you can hear me. My sound is okay. Is that correct? Can I assume everything is fine in terms of sound?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So let me share my screen and on my camera. Give me a moment time. So let me put my slides. Cool. I share my entire screen. That's it. Cool. I want to make sure that all the slides are there because nowadays we all interacting online, so things may sometimes seems slightly awkward in terms of sometimes we feel that it's presenting over the other end, but the other end cannot see it or hear it, right? So anyway, we set up everything fine, and I think time is exactly 10:35, right? So thank you for joining for this session. Thank you, Dr. Alex. Thank you, Lynch Madam. Thank all friends from UC College, right? I don't know each of your name because I know that it's a big list. I cannot, recollect each of your name, but hope we could make it as a kind of interactive session and, make it fruitful as possible because this is Saturday, because you spend some time on Saturday that make sure that weekend time we are spending together are supposed to become useful for you, right? And first of all, I'm very grateful to know that, this kind of really good causes in the sense, the software is a very important, role currently playing in our every aspect of the life, right? The software freedom is very important than many other things. So the Software Freedom Day, whether it is we call it as a celebration or just conducting some events or kind of evangelizing that spirit of open source and that freedom of software in any way, that is really commendable, right? So you can really kind of proud about it because many of the other institutions, I don't want to particularly name any institutions or anything, but at least your college is doing this commendable work, so you can proud about it, right? So the idea is to make it as a kind of friendly talk. Whatever I learn, I cannot touch each and every aspect of open source software or how to use it or contribute it, but I try to do give a kind of 101. We technically call it as 101, means very high level introduction to how we can use open source, how we can learn it, how we can contribute it and share it, right? That's the idea of this talk. And I wish to make it as more interactive. So please feel free to unmute yourself. I hope you can unmute yourself without the help from the admin. Otherwise, I may encourage everyone to unmute yourself and ask questions wherever you feel necessary, right? I try to keep some time for the question answer towards the end of the session, but even before that, if you feel you want to ask some questions or clarify some points, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay. So let's move to the next slide. And before moving to the next slide, if some of you want to know who is this guy, right? So you can go to my LinkedIn profile and you can see that, I put some information, what I did in the past, that kind of some information I try to put in the profile. So that's what I am, right? I don't want to give an introduction again and, boring you, right? That I don't want to do that. So, and other than that, right, to give a kind of interactiveness for this session, I put together some questions, precisely 4 questions in a survey format. I don't want to share the data with anybody else or anything. I just want to make it more a kind of interactive session. That's why I put 4 questions. I will remind you when you're supposed to answer the survey. You don't need to give your email ID because email ID is a totally voluntary thing. It's it's not mandatory at all. So you can directly go to the survey. You can just submit and answer those questions because that questions and answers for that question give some kind of context, context to set where we are standing currently and where you are heading. That kind of information. So if you could totally voluntary, feel no pressure. So go and give. If you are comfortable, go and answer those questions, right? So I will tell you when you're supposed to answer the question. So whenever you are feeling sleepy, I will tell you, when you're supposed to answer the question. So, and otherwise it's a friendly talk. So please go and grab your cup of coffee or whatever the drinks you prefer, so you can take it and we can, get into the conversation, right? So Let me move to the first slide, right? I don't want to bore again. I don't want to bore you with too many slides. It's a few slides to set the context. So if you look at this slide, right? So
Sir,
what is common here, right?
Vinod
What
sir,
is common here? So hello.
we are not able to see the presentation.
Oh, you are not able to see the presentation?
No.
That's. I tried to share my. Can you see it now?
Yeah, now it has come.
Wonderful.
Can you make it full screen?
I'm going to the presentation mode, right? Okay. So sorry about that, Miss. Right. That's what I told. Sometime the uh, permission may not be right to share the screen, so that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to say here in this slide, right? If you look at some of the logos here, right? So what is common here? What is common here? So all these softwares, some of them are operating systems, some of them are frameworks, some of them are languages, right? What is common here? These are all leading open source softwares, right? Leading open source software. You can see that the Linux is sitting on top, right? That's a kind of you know a mother of all these things, right? But a sort of, not, I'm not telling it is mother of all open source, but it is a sort of overarching all this software, right? The Linux is on top of it, and under that Linux you can see a couple of other logos, right? Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes means it's a software which we are typically using to orchestrate large scale containers, right? Large scale containers. When you deploy your software as a container, right? Use Kubernetes. So if you ask anyone working in that cloud native application side, they know Kubernetes, right? Now it's a kind of buzzword in the industry. And same is the case with the Docker, right? Docker is another technology which we typically use to run the containers, right? And Python, everybody knows Python. If you learn computer science, you need to learn Python, right? And of course the Android, right? If you're not into computer or you're allergic to computer, still you need to interact with Android. Same is the case with MySQL. Most of the leading um, uh, portals or the even YouTube, right? The YouTube backend is technically using MySQL, right? So you cannot avoid none of this software, right? So all these things are actually open source software, right? And if I move to the next slide, sorry. So why I put this slide, right? So one concept is like, sometime open source software started by someone as a hobby. So for example, Linux, right? Linus Torvalds started it as a kind of hobby, right? It as a kind of hobby plus a college project, right? So that way Linux started, the Linux kernel development started, and that kernel development eventually evolved to a mega project, right? That's how Linux evolved. But don't think that all the open source softwares are started initiating as a kind of or initiated as a kind of college project or hobby or any kind of some of the open source projects are consciously started by some of the bigger companies, right? They have an agenda in their mind, or they think that, okay, this is how you have to treat the software, or this is how you have to manage certain things. And with that perception, they start this big open source project. And then over a period of time, they think that, okay, the framework and the philosophy is ready. They will contribute to a larger community, and they try to sell that idea to multiple other companies, so that even that company and their rival companies can come together and make that project as a bigger project, right? you can see some examples here, right? If you see Kubernetes, right? Again, I'm touching on that name Kubernetes because Kubernetes is one of the software. And now anybody towards the cloud native. Cloud native means people you know to people deploying the application in a way that it can portable to any cloud. Not one cloud. You can portable to multiple cloud. We call it as a multi-cloud approach, right? That kind of approaches people are following for their software deployment. Then typically people use Kubernetes, or Kubernetes is a kind of default cloud native management tool. Right? So Kubernetes as a project, technically it started by Google, right? Once the Google engineers, based on the way they are internally managing some of their bigger infrastructure, and they thought that okay, this philosophy is good for the world to manage large scale project. That's how they started Kubernetes, and over a period of time it contributed to the community, and other companies like Red Hat, VMware, all these companies later point of time came together, and then they took from that point to make it as a bigger project. Now you know that even Google's rivals like Amazon and Microsoft, they are also using Kubernetes. That's the beauty of open source, right? It's not like one company started and their rivals immediately started an altogether different project and using that project. That's not the way for open source. Open source, even rivals also can come together and collaborate. Same is the case with React, right? React technically Facebook engineers started, and they made it as open source, right? And anybody knows about the full stack development or the front end development, they know that what is React, right? Nowadays it is very difficult to avoid React. Same is the case with Spring. The Spring, technically VMware bought that project and made it as open source. So Spring framework. So this is some of the history, right? I don't want to bore you with history, but this is how the open source sometimes evolving. Now, if you look at, I purposefully avoided names like Red Hat because Red Hat like companies, whatever they are doing, whatever the project you can find under the Red Hat logo, all projects are products. What they are selling in the market, they are all open source. Whenever Red Hat buying some project or product from market, sometimes they acquire certain companies. Maybe that point of time that product is not open source. Once they bought, then they go through the code and they make sure that there is no license violation, and eventually they make it open source, right? That's how some companies are working. It depends on the philosophy. Same is the case with VMware. VMware has a separate open source division. If you go to VMware site, you can see that certain section. There are certain sections dedicated for open source. I will touch on certain things later point of time. So why you should care about open source? That's the thing, right? We have to start with why. We always say start with why, right? Because anything, everything, if you spend time or money or investing your resources, before that you have to always start with why I should do it, right? So this conversation also something like that, right? So why you should care about open source, especially to improve your technical skills. To improve your technical skills, you can improve technical skills multiple ways, but open source is one of the easiest way to improve your technical skill. So this one thing you have to care about, right? Because definitely when you go to the job market, you have to upskill yourself. Otherwise, you cannot compete. So you are going to compete with the world. You are not going to compete with your colleagues or sitting someone next to you, right? You are going to compete with the world, right? So that point of time, you have to upskill your multiple software skills, right? So that point of time, open source comes in handy, right? So I will tell certain, I can provide certain hints and at later point of time. So how you can use open source to upskill yourself. Improve your collaboration skill. Very, very important. Nowadays, software development is a true collaborative work, right? If you are sitting in a corner and developing something, that not make any sense because big companies, when you go to big companies, those companies are actually looking for your collaboration skills because sorry, technically when you look at any companies, right? Any companies like a Google or even Facebook or any companies, right? Hundreds of thousands of people are sitting and working for a project. The other day I was checking with someone working in working a certain part of TikTok, right? So I heard that almost 8,000 plus people are working on that project itself, right? It's a big number, right? So that many people working on certain things, right? You have to collaborate. The collaboration skills are very, very important. You may be smart enough to develop something yourself, but you cannot collaborate with others, then that skill don't have any use, right? Because you can do it. You can do it certain small things, but whenever you wish to get into this kind of bigger project, your collaboration skills are sometimes more important than your actual coding skills. Okay, especially to demonstrate your knowledge and creativity, right? So when you get into the job market, you have to demonstrate yourself, right? You know something, you have to present how open source can help here. Definitely I can give some hints there also. So develop better software for your clients. Suppose you are an entrepreneur, so you start some, nowadays startup is a kind of craze, right? So you plan, you don't want to go to a job, or you don't want to work under someone, right? So you want to become CEOs. So you start some company. The better option to start with something is develop, pick something from open source community and make it, modify it, make it usable for your client and make money, right? So that's one of the options. Or you can use some of the languages like Python or Golang, right? So you pick that language and use that language to develop your software, right? That's other way. Or the final thing is more important for you, right? To get a job quickly and make the dollars you deserve, right? That's important, right? So once you complete your studies, now tech market is so hot. It's either getting a job, if you have the right skill, getting the job is much easier than previous years. So to make sure that you are getting the right job and you are getting the right money, open source is one of the easiest way to do it, right? Compared to some other way, right? Any questions? Any clarification? Sorry, I two times I tap my mouse and it keep the slides. Okay. So let me move to the next slide, right? So what is open source, right? The open source. I know that as part of your studies or anything, you might already know about what is open source and the definition of open source, right? So I don't want to repeat all the things, but I could give. I use this slide to give some idea about some of the advantages of open source, right? One is the open source, during the meetup introduction, right? So Madam told that, what is the definition of open source? The open source software is a computer software that is released under a license. It is releasing under a license. I will touch the license aspect of the open source in the next slide. Released under a license, and it can freely use, share. What is sharing? The source code of the software, right? You can share it and you can use it for multiple purposes. That's the philosophy behind open source, right? And definitely almost all open source develop in a collaborative manner. It is not one person is developing and throwing that code over the wall to someone else. It's not the way, right? You develop in a collaborative way. That is the spirit of open source, right? And open source is a prominent example of collaboration. So it's a textbook example of collaboration, right? Or in other words, sometimes people refer it as social coding, right? Social coding. So you are interacting with multiple people and doing the development. The social coding is the actual jargon used to in the software development world used to refer that collaboration. And any capable user can do the you can contribute. You don't, suppose you are currently studying for your MCS or BTech, right? So that's not necessary. In software, unfortunately, if someone couldn't even join college, or due to some circumstances they are not even complete certain part of the studies, right? They can still contribute. The only thing is you should know how to contribute, or you should be able to contribute to that area, right? But the open source software is a vast area. Most of the people can, even if you know plain English, you can certain extent contribute to open source. I will tell how that part is happening. So the collaboration in open source is, it is a kind of inclusiveness, right? So if you are from any community, right? Maybe you are not so familiar with a particular language, or you are not comfortable to work in certain environment, or you may multiple inhibitions may be there with certain people in the society, right? So still they can come forward and contribute to open source. Many of the open source communities are now becoming increasingly more inclusive because of certain past things happened, right? Now communities are becoming more inclusive. There is no discrimination based on the age or based on the race or anything, right? It's more becoming inclusive. So you can go ahead and contribute to community. So you can look at the open source community and find yourself which community is more inclusive and more collaborative with you. You can go ahead and contribute. If you are not comfortable with that community, always you can backstep, and you can remove yourself from that community and move on with other communities. Nobody will question you, right? And the ability to examine the code and facilitate public trust in the software. This becomes very, very important. This becomes so important, right? So either, the open source, the code is visible to all the persons who are collaborating in that particular project. Anybody can go and see the code, what they coded, right? Why I'm telling this is important, right? So if you notice some of the, or you might notice some of the recent news, especially the security vulnerability in the software side, right? Certain news like SolarWinds. SolarWinds is one of the headline. Couple of weeks back, right? That was a hot headline in on security news around software, right? So what happened with SolarWinds is basically a network monitoring tool. The tool used by many of the leading industries, many of the leading software companies, including Microsoft, and even certain top secret American, US government projects. They are using SolarWinds for the computer network monitoring. What actually happened is, like, during the software build process, means in any companies, right? Some of you aware of the process of software development life cycle. When is the software development life cycle? There is a key process called the build process, right? Build means after coding, after the software coded by multiple people, it has to build and test, and then it has to eventually release. So during that process, somehow, not particularly, don't ask me how, but there are multiple theories around. But somehow during the build process, someone breached, or a group, or a hostile nation breach into their build system, software build system, and inject malicious code to the system. It's something like you buy some product from your trusted supermarket or trusted store, think that, okay, that store owner is my friend, or that supermarket is very reputed supermarket, they not do any contamination for the food product. But if the contamination happened at the factory side itself, what happened, right? You cannot trust, right? Because the food is packaged, the seal is not broken, you buy it, but the food actually contaminated at the factory end itself. This is somehow, this is what happened with SolarWinds also. SolarWinds build process, it a malicious code injected. So when other companies trusted SolarWinds, and they look at the signature of SolarWinds and they bought it and they deployed in their network. Once they deployed, this malicious code triggered, and it created some backdoor to their systems, and the other hostile countries or set of people, they monitor whatever the things going on that network, right? Because any communication going on through that network, if someone could monitor from outside, they know, then they definitely will come to know about many secrets. What's the secrets passing through the wire, right? It's like a wiretapping, right? So what happened is like SolarWinds is a compiled binary, right? Nobody could go inside the source code of the software and look at it because it's not open, right? But if it is open source, before using the product, the people can go and literally see the source code, right? If any defense entities or any top secret entities, when they buy some software, they're allowed to see the source code. They will not use as it is, right? Even the bigger companies, whenever they are using this as open source, what they do is they will fork. Fork means they will copy the open source to their repository and look at the source code and make sure that that source code not contains any malicious code, and then they build the software and use it. So they can literally look at the source code, right? But if only that company only can look at the source code, if some contamination happened like the case of SolarWinds, other people cannot see it, right? So software, the open source softwares are, that way it is more secure than the proprietary softwares, right? It is not like the coding itself is, intrinsically become secure, not like that. Because more eyes watching the software, that's why the software eventually becomes secure. Because anybody noticing, hey, there is a vulnerability with the software, right? That's how the Linux kernel, any bug is, or OpenSSL, this kind of things. Whenever some bug is reporting, or even Kubernetes, right? Some bugs reported. Multiple times the bugs reported, because always it's a software, right? Bugs are, it's a kind of, you can only ensure bugs in a software, right? So if something happened with some bugs are there, only thing is the other people can easily identify it, and they themselves, if they are capable to do, find out the fix, they can contribute the fix also, and someone else can look at the fix. Okay, if this fix is good enough to seal that vulnerability, they can accept it and make it more secure, right? That's how the development is working. So what is open source license? This is another area of importance for you guys, right? If you write some piece of software and put it in somewhere, right, and then you call it as open source, will it become open source? No, right? Technically, no, because you can call it as open source. You say that, I write this piece of software and the code is available. Anybody can go and use and share, right? And I like to call it as open source. Technically, yes, but nobody will accept it as a open source. Why? Because open source software need to govern by certain licenses, right? Open source licenses are not a monolithic license. N number of licenses are available, right? Hundreds of licenses are available. So you have to label that particular piece of software under certain license. Then only others believe you, right? When you ask others to contribute to my project, hey, I put one, I started some project. Why don't you come and contribute, right? So if you want to engage others to contribute towards your project, you need to declare that piece of software under some license. Otherwise, tomorrow you say that, hey, now you contribute. Now I am going to take the entire source code, and the other people need to believe you. So that's why the open source software need to declare under certain licenses. So that's what we called as open source licenses. And open source license, as I told, it's not monolithic license. It's n number of licenses are available, right? So why it is important for you, right? The license things are boring, right? Definitely license things are boring. So, but what is important for you? some of you guys, right? Some of you are interested to learn about open source license. This is a very, very good opportunity, right? Because whenever the nuance of open source license is so huge. So that's the reason whenever a company or an organization develop the software and this license, they are very, very particular about the license before they are commercially selling that software, because each of the license clauses are very, very different. So if someone knows about the open source license, they're mostly responsible for the release of that software. And nowadays lot of mechanisms are available with organizations to scroll to search through the source code and compare it against certain databases and find out what piece of the software potentially coming under open source, and what license that particular piece of software, what governed by which license. Those kind of things, it is easier to understand nowadays. But if someone knows about the open source license, it is very easy for them to securely engage them in that development process. That is the reason I'm telling. I will touch on this license in the next slide also. So you can even you can develop your own license if you say you want to create a license of your own, and whatever the software you guys are developing internally, you want to declare under a software under a UC college license, you can do it. But only thing is, your license need to approved by open source initiative. That is a separate governing body. That governing body, you have to put n number of clauses. Okay, if some piece of software governed under this license, then you can do what are the do's and don'ts of that particular license, or that particular piece of software coming under that license. You can put all these things, and if this open source initiative, it's a foundation kind of, it's a body. So this foundation, it's technically not a foundation, it's a governing body. So this governing body approve your license, then that becomes a license. So that's the reason I'm telling this open source software license is not a monolith. It's a n number of licenses are there. So let's look at what are some of the key licenses, right? So these are some of the popular licenses. If you go to this portal, right, opensource.org/licenses, you can see hundreds of licenses. So some of the softwares are governed by Apache license, some are under BSD license, some are under GNU General Public License. Each of these licenses got its own nuances. Nuances means its own in plain English, do's and don'ts. If that particular software under this license, you can do what you're supposed to do, and if you use that software, what are the compliance things you have to comply with certain things. So, for example, GNU Public License, GPL, generally we call it as. GPL is a very sticky license. Sticky license means if you use a software which governed by GNU General Public License, that particular piece of the software, whatever the areas you are using that software, that also naturally comes under GNU General Public License or GPL. Whether you like it or not, that piece of the software also naturally become GPL, right? So you have to contribute that software back. You cannot say that, hey, I pick some piece of software from Git repository which was under GPL, and now I modified it. Now I do not want to contribute to anybody. I want to make it as part of my software. I want to sell it, right, and make money. You cannot do it. What if you do? What happen is someone look at that piece of software and sue you. Then it's all $1 million deals, right? You have to go to court, or you have to do kind of out of court settlement. That's the reason I'm telling this license nuance is very, very important, right? So if some of you guys are interested to do this boring job, this is a very, very good thing to highlight in your resume. Maybe your people interviewing you, they are not aware of all this license. You can proactively tell. It's not an interview prep session, but I'm telling, if they are not asking about this license also, you can proactively tell, I'm pretty familiar with open source licenses. So they will definitely get impressed, because this knowledge, you know, I don't want to name companies, but if you Google, you can see that many companies, without knowing the consequence of, or they know the consequence, but some of the developers in that companies, they might not aware of this consequence, and they somehow skip this license, and they consume some of the publicly available open source software without knowing the without knowing that consequence or the nuance of that licenses, and they use the software within their product, and without declaring the license, they sold it. And what happened? Some foundations, which are backing this software, or some individuals or some other companies, they sue them, right? Once if you preparing that software and selling it to your, suppose, as I told, you starting a startup, right? You are building a startup, and you are building a beautiful software, and some part of the software, maybe it is to connect to a Bluetooth device, or maybe it is to connect to a printer, or maybe it is to connect to some other network. So you think that, okay, why should I code this software? Instead, let me go through Stack Overflow or Git repository and find some piece of software, freely available software, and consume it within my. That's a smart approach, right? If why you should reinvent the wheel, if that piece of software is already freely available, and you feel that that is secure and steady, you can use that software. But the problem is, when you use that software, you should know about the licensing aspect of that software. If you use that software within your beautiful product, and sell it to your neighborhood school or neighborhood or whatever it is, it's not a problem. But assume your friends, some of your friends in United States, or some of your friends in Europe, they think that, or you yourself reach out to some of your clients over the internet and try to sell that software to them. In those countries, especially the developed countries, European countries are very particular, right? This licensing coming into picture, right? And they found out that you use this software without declaring that license, or without following the the governing model of that particular license, into trouble, right? Maybe you either end up run away from that situation, or you already registered in the name of somebody or your friend's name. They are into deep trouble, right? So you prepare to better prepare to settle out of court with millions of dollars, right? So that's the reason, whenever you are developing some software and consuming, using some software from the internet, you have to very, very particular about these licenses. That's the reason some of the companies, some of the major companies, they never even touch on certain licenses like GNU General Public License, because these are very sticky licenses. Some companies are not comfortable to go through all the aspect of that particular license. I spent some time over here, because the reason why I spent some time over here is, this is, if you are looking for a job in the industry, this license is very important. And if you can do a good read or bit research around these licenses and put that knowledge in your resume, that definitely will help you, right? So for example, Linux kernel is governed under this GPL, right? So that's the reason, if any company pick Linux kernel and do some development in that Linux kernel, they always contribute that piece of code back to the community, back to the repository, because they cannot hide it. They cannot hide it. Oh, I fixed this bugs in Linux kernel, now you have to pay me money. They cannot sell like that, because initially they built using a piece of software which actually governed by GPL. Right? So that's the reason. Any questions? Any doubts? So for more reference, you have to go to this portal. You can read. Now I'm going to my next slide, right? First, Free and open source. Are they same? The free and open source, we usually use this both the term, right? Free and open source software and, uh, and open source software. Technically, if I give my own spin, right, to that definition, I could say that, majority of the force, free and open source software are open source, but all open source software are not force. You can think in that way, right? That's a plain English thing, because sometimes the bigger enterprises, they are not so comfortable with the term free, right? Because free has a meaning, it slightly different meaning. Technically, when they conceptualize the idea of force, the especially the people like RMS, Richard M. Stallman, like people, the visionaries, when they conceptualize the idea of free, that free got a different meaning, right? Because we are not visionaries like them, RMS like people, right? They're in altogether in a different level, and rest of the world, cannot, concept, they cannot visualize the exact philosophical meaning of the word free. Especially, there is a language limitation in English, the term free, right? So they came out with a very interesting analogy, right? The free software not means free as in free beer. It's not like free beer, right? It's someone free beer means what? You drink beer and someone else pay for it, right? So it's all about the money, who is paying for it, right? But in software world, it is not like some piece of software someone giving it free of cost. Not like that, right? Um, it's not about the cost or who pay the bill, who pick the bill, that kind of no, not the free. The free in free software is like free speech, right? If I give a bad joke, it's like after the free beer, what you do? A free speech, right? Yeah, it's something like that. No, that is not actually the free speech, but you can think that you think in a different level, and without any inhibition, you're talking, right? So that kind of thing. So that's a free speech, right? The philosophically, you are without any whatever way you want to think in that context, you think, right? That is what the idea of force. But as I told, when commercial interest came into picture, the force is not a very attractive word at all. That's the reason sometimes people consciously skip this word force and use only open source. But in a high level, force is a kind of overarching term. It's an overarching term. So you can think that, okay, the force is a overarching term, but open source is some open source software, they're not technically called as force, because open source also sometimes to keep the commercial interest of the company, sometimes people use the term like open core. Open core means a piece of the software, or the crux of the software, or the key functions of the software, they're declared under some open source license. But certain functions of that software, you need to pay money. So for example, if one tool you buy, right? Some tool you buy. So it's something like, I take a very, very light example. Like sometimes you use a Team or, Meet or Zoom. If you pay money, more attendees can join. You can do various other things. But if you use the free freely available software, or you are not paying, you have to let go certain features, right? You can only use limited features, something like that. So if that's what they call it as open core. The core piece of the software is open, but certain functions like a web interface or a feature to integrating with Active Directory, those kind of features, maybe you have to pay money. That piece of the software not declared under open source. Only the key features are only declared under open source. That's what they called as open core. So that kind of companies are not too keen to call themselves as, or keen to call that software piece of software as force. So that's why the force is a kind of overarching term, and open source is more general term. Especially using the context of industry, the IT industry and commercial dealings. Any questions? Yes. Now I'm coming to the next phase of our discussion, right? How to contribute to the open software. So, I told you about the open source license. That's one of the area you can, if you wish, you can do a little bit of research. And if at all some of you guys are comfortable, pick some specialization in that area. That will definitely help you. And other area where to build a career, I told you how to build a career around open source, right? To contribute, the contribution of the open source, right? So when you complete your studies and go to the job market, what are you supposed to do? You have to prove yourself. You have to demonstrate yourself. I know something, right? How you do it? You can, one way is you can show your mark card or rank list or whatever it is. The other way is you need to get some experience certificate. That's an older way, right? Older way, right? No, not anymore. Some people still do it, but one smart way is to contribute to a open source. How to contribute? You have to, go to some of the, to find a project and contribute, right? Easier said than done, right? So so you can start with, right? You can start contributing. The first, you don't need to become a super genius or super coder or even a smart coder. That's not a mandatory step at all. If you know the basics, you can start contribute. The first and foremost, most of the open source softwares are keeping in some public code repositories. You can safely assume that a major portion of the software they are keeping in GitHub. GitHub is a publicly hosted software repository. So you can go to GitHub, create your account. That's the very first step. If you don't have a GitHub account, I'm not asking the question. If we are doing it face to face, I normally ask the people, how many of you got a GitHub account, right? Otherwise, if you don't have a GitHub account, my simple request is go and create one. If you don't like open source or don't want to contribute, still, if you wish to pursue a career in software industry, go and create a GitHub account as of today, right? Then, I will tell the reason, right? So you create a GitHub account. That's one of the important things. Then what you're supposed to do? You learn some of the methods, how to interact with the GitHub. It's like, there's a slight learning curve, right? It's not more than the learning curves of any social media, right? So if you effectively use any social media, there also supposed to be a slight learning curve, right? It's slightly more than that, but not very tedious. So you refer some of the freely available videos in YouTube, how to use GitHub, and do some, if at all you didn't start, I'm telling. If some of you guys already started, don't curse me. I'm talking to people, those who didn't create their GitHub account, right? Not yet. So see some videos and familiarize with the certain jargons like master branches, pull, git pull, fetch, issues, fork, those kind of jargons, right? So what those things, pull request, you familiarize yourself with a Git repository, then identify a project. Because as I told, the open source project is not coded using a single language or anything. Some of the open source projects are based on Golang, some are based on Python, some are based on even C++ or Java or anything, right? It could be Rust or any language, right? So that's one of the barrier you need to consider, right? So you don't think that, okay, let me learn a language end to end, then start contribute. Don't think this is the way to learn that language. So pick a project which more comfortable for you in terms of the knowledge. Already you started that language, or at least you know the hello world Hello World part of that language, pick that project. Because other way, if you go, start, the learning curve is more. You need to first learn that language. That that's a kind of barrier, and you throw it away everything, right? So you pick some project, and you if you go to freecodecamp.org kind of portals, right, you can learn a lot of things, and that project itself will help you to create some git repositories and stuff like that, right? So you refer some of the things, pick a project, and most of the people working in the software, they are on some kind of collaboration tools, right? Even before the pandemic, don't think that now you guys are mostly using the collaboration tool like a Team or Meet or anything after this pandemic lockdown only. Before that, you come to class, right? But open source software, from the day one, it's on collaboration, because people cannot go to a company or something, right? People are working in different companies or even different places, different countries, different time zones, right? So they need to collaborate, right? So open source software, pandemic was not affected at all, because that from the beginning, those softwares are, as I told, it was social. It ever been into social coding, right? So you need to pick a tool, right? Most of the source, I'm not telling 100%, but most of the leading software, the open source communities are on Slack. So you create a Slack account, very easy, and join that. You go to that software, open source software Git repository or the portal. You can see what is the Slack channel relevant for the community. So join that community, create your username and password, and start interact with them. And that interaction, during the interaction, don't pretend anything. You don't feel stupid, right? So you can ask any question, right? You can simply say that I don't know, right? I'm coming from a small village. I'm coming from a small college, or I'm not telling you see small college, but I'm telling you can, you can reveal yourself and say that, hey, or this language is not so comfortable with me, right? So you can tell and start interact with the people. So somebody will definitely will mentor you, guide you to go through that steps. And if you think that okay, that community is not welcome community, go to a different Slack, different community. I told you, right? You can skip that community, go to a different community, interact with them, right? Because it is their loss, it is not your loss, right? So and start contribute. Multiple ways you can contribute. It's not necessarily you have to contribute always as a code, but you can do documentations, testings. There is a README file maybe there to how to deploy that software, and you try to go through the steps. And if you find that some steps are not working, you can report it back reporting. You can do talks on that particular software within your college or outside, or YouTube tutorials, or the coding itself, right? But I would say that as a student, don't go with meetups or the YouTube. That type of contribution, it is very difficult for you to establish the credential, because because you are just talking, right? You are just talking. Nobody, what is your experience, or you that may not be so attractive, right? So once you started your career, you can definitely do it, but you can attend the meetups and other thing. But for you, I may say that documentation is a good thing, because the software documentation is a key part of the software release. So if you know that documentation, that contribute. Maybe you are contributing 2 lines, or doing some grammatical corrections, or doing some English wording. Good enough, right? Do that contribution, or do some testing, do some bug reporting, or even code contribution. Don't assume that you are going to contribute 5,000 lines of code. Maybe you are contributing 5 lines of code. That's good enough. Because if you contribute something and put that information in your profile and put that code in your Git repository, and when you go for the first interview, you are telling, hey, I contributed for this particular project. I contributed 5 lines of code, or I reported the bug. I contributed to the documentation of that project. It is proving a lot of things. What are the things? They immediately come to know that, hey, this guy know how to read others' code. Skill number 1. If this guy know how to read others' code or how others' documentation, sensible guy, right? So the second thing, what is the other thing? He knows how to use Git repository, because most of the organizations using Git or similar kind of tools. So they immediately will recognize you as a person, those who know how to deal with software repository. Big knowledge. Otherwise, if they recruit you as a fresh person to go walk you through that kind of things, itself will take weeks or months, right? So you know it, right? How to interact with the repository, right? You proved it. Then what else? You did some pull request and you submitted certain documentation changes, you submitted certain code changes. What you are proving, you are collaborating. You are collaborating with other people. They put some comments and you reply it, and and go through the issues. You understand the problem area. You are interacting with them. They will give some comments. So that collaboration skill is something everybody in the industry is looking for, right? Otherwise, if they recruit you as a smart coder, they cannot assure that you can collaborate, because collaboration is a key thing, as I told, right? If you do some contribution and highlight that contribution in your resume and put that contribution in your Git repository, that itself is talking volumes. Volumes means it is talking a lot of things, and that lot of things definitely will help you to get that dream job. Not always your coding skill. Your next door guy, or next the guy sitting next to you, maybe he or she is cool enough to writing that beautiful maybe what to say, the search algorithm, right? The binary search tree algorithm she or he could contribute. But you are not smart enough to do that binary search algorithm at all. You may do it, but not that smart. But you can collaborate. You can properly interact with the Git repository. Those kind of skills you can prove. Definitely, the industry will give preference to you than the other person who can only write the binary algorithm, but they are not good in collaboration or dealing with the Git repository. Then they have to send them to the trainings, right? The training is a pain area for any industry. Definitely, industry is put you through the trainings. But if someone the tie is between two people, one person can already contributed and proved their skill, and the other person not had started doing this kind of interaction. Definitely, that weightage will come to that person already contributed, right? That's what I'm telling. Don't assume that you have to learn all these things before applying for the job. I'm telling to if someone need to someone looking for that extra edge, they can go through this kind of processes. That's what I'm telling. So these are all small things, and lot of tutorials available in YouTube. Small tutorials. Go through it, learn it. Use some software. Go through that thing. Try to contribute. Maybe start with documentation. Maybe start with the issue creation or something like that. And if you are comfortable, as I told, again, I'm repeating myself, but as I told, if possible, do some code contribution.
Sir, a question is waiting for you.
Pardon?
A question is waiting for you.
Oh, for me? Okay, cool.
Abhin?
Yes, ma'am. Hi, sir. Good morning. Abhin.
Yeah, please.
Sir, എൻ്റെ ഡൗട്ട് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ സാർ നേരത്തെ മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്തിരുന്നു, നമ്മളൊരു ഓപ്പൺ സോഴ്സ് പ്രൊഡക്റ്റ് നമ്മുടെ പ്രൊജക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന ചില ഇഷ്യൂസ് സാർ പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നു, അതായത് കോർട്ട് വരെ പോകേണ്ടി വരുന്ന ഒരു ഇഷ്യൂ. അത് ആ ഒരു ഇഷ്യൂ ഒന്നുകൂടി ഒന്ന് ക്ലിയർ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും?
സോ ആ ഇഷ്യൂ എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാല്, സോ ഐ തിങ്ക് എവരിബഡി ഈസ് comfortable with Malayalam. I can switch to Malayalam. So ആ ഇഷ്യൂ എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാല്, നമ്മൾ ഒരു സോഫ്റ്റ്വെയർ ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഓൾറെഡി കോൺട്രിബ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്ത്, that software is already declared under certain licenses, right? So that already that software is under, say for example, GPL license. I'm taking that GPL example. It's a GPL license software. So what you are doing, you pick that source code for some purpose, right? Maybe the full source, full software is not you are not using that software as it is. You may use it for particular function, maybe to connect with a Bluetooth device. You think that why should I write the entire code to connect to the Bluetooth device? നിങ്ങളെ സോഫ്റ്റ്വെയർ ജസ്റ്റ് എടുക്കുന്നത് ചിലപ്പോൾ ഒരു ബ്ലൂടൂത്ത് ഡിവൈസ് കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാനോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് പ്രിന്റർ കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാനോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏതെങ്കിലും API കോൾ ചെയ്യാനോ, അങ്ങനെ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഫംഗ്ഷന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടായിരിക്കും ആ സോഫ്റ്റ്വെയർ എടുക്കുന്നത്. അതിൽ നിങ്ങൾ യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്ത് you find that okay, that is not usable as it is, right? So you do some mild changes also, and you comfortably use that software as part of your product, and you are not declaring anything, right? You ignored. You think that okay, that I got free from the internet, now I use as part of my product, and you try to sell it to a country where these licenses are very, very important. It's not a joke. It's a very important license. You know, they are seeing this license are very, very crucial thing. So now you are trying to sell this product to some that kind of countries, right? So you solved it. Definitely, you know, a lot of people are around the world. They are specializing in this kind of licenses, right? Or your rivals, or someone lost the opportunity, or your customers themselves, they feel that okay, you know, there is or they may use some auditors, right, to find out that what you know, are they are violating any license or not. They are, you know, engaging some auditors in their company. Unfortunately, they find that this, you know, in your product, you are violating some license. Now that your customer don't want to take that ownership, customer will tell that, hey, this startup sold me this piece of source code, right? This product. Now you are in trouble because you already signed some, you know, indemnification clauses. Now you might familiar with the clause indemnification, right? You can see in every day, you know, if you see the news, why certain vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna and, you know, Johnson and Johnson, why they are not allowing in India? Because India government is not ready to sign that indemnification clause. Means if they inject that vaccine and some people got into trouble, you know, accidentally, maybe some allergic reason or anything, right? I'm not telling vaccine is good or bad or anything, but I'm telling if some trouble and they put some case, that case eventually go to that company, right? So these companies want the government should not allow that kind of claims. That's what the indemnification clause. But when you sell some product, mostly the client, your client will tell that you have to bear the cost of any kind of this kind of lawsuit, right? They will not accept it. അങ്ങനെ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു കേസ് ഉണ്ടായി കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ വലിയ പ്രശ്നമാണ്. വലിയ പ്രശ്നം എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ millions of dollars, certain leading software company, because I cannot name all those companies for obvious reasons, but some maybe they are using some small piece of software, വലിയ പ്രശ്നത്തിലേക്ക് പോകും. അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് നിങ്ങളിപ്പം ഒരു സാംസങ് ഫോൺ, if you buy a Samsung phone, and Samsung phone normally give a big user manual, right? As user manual you get. So if you open that user manual, or even some kind of, even nowadays every component got a piece of software. Android TV, any Android TV or any smart TV or anything, if you buy and go to the last portion of the user manual, you can see that in 6-point, 5-point letters, lot of open source licenses they declare. You go to the manual, if you find some manual in your home, old manual, go to the last portion, and you can see that a big portion of the manual, they print small letters, use open source licenses. Why they are declaring? They are telling upfront, hey, I'm using this software. If they are declaring, and especially when they modify a GPL license, they will contribute it back. They will contribute it back to the community. So that's the reason you should aware of the clauses of that license before you using the software. If you are not sure about the clauses of the license, I may say that don't use it. Don't use it, especially when you aiming for advanced countries. Don't use it. That's why you know, in companies also they are keep on doing this kind of you know, open source software compliance studies they call it as, because they will always scroll through the software, whatever coding is happening, and make sure that code is no snippets of the the product source code is violating any of the licenses. I did a big answer. Answer.
Thanks for the answer, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's very important. So, and I'm telling, if you try to learn the nuance of the license, please highlight in your resume. And most of the recruiters, they don't know all these things, but you have to, nowadays when you go to the interviews, right? Don't expect the interviewer will ask all questions. Interviewer maybe ask some questions that you may know or may not know, but whenever, you feel that you know something else, you tell those answers proactively. You say, hey, I know something else. Whatever you asked up to this point, it's okay. But I know something else also. Can I explain? And then you tell that, hey, I as part of my studies, I learned about the open source license. This is my added advantage. Yes, so suddenly they will think that, hey, this guy is smart guy, right? He knows about the open source licenses. It's kind of some brownie points, right? So that's what I'm telling you. So it's my last slide. I think we took some extra time. Hope it is fine. So I stop in this slide or next slide. I think this is last slide. So if I told one line in the previous slide, how to find a open source software to contribute. Don't come back, don't ever think that I cannot find any open source software. Actually, hundreds of thousands of open source software out there. I just put a screenshot of the open source software under one of the foundations, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. Cloud Native Compute Foundation itself is one of the foundations under Linux Foundation. Okay, Linux Foundation is an overarching foundation for many things. The Cloud Native Foundation is one of the foundations under that Linux Foundation. Under Cloud Native Foundation itself, you can see a huge bunch of software, right? It's literally it is overwhelmed, right? So it's very difficult to scroll through. So you can find some software where you can comfortably contribute. So don't assume that there is no software I could find to no open source project I could find in the internet to contribute. Don't think that. Okay, there are a hell lot of projects, right? So it's just I'm just to give a glimpse of that. I found the list of projects under one of the foundations. Okay, so these are some of the referral URLs. These just a referral URL. Some of the leading software things. I'm not telling you how to contribute to these things. You are free to choose. It is your project. So these are some of the referrals. One is Kubernetes.io. If you want to contribute to Kubernetes, this is the portal you go and refer. If you want to contribute to some infrastructure project like some networking related project like Andrea, go to that project. Another container registry project, Go Harbor, welcome community, mostly from Asia. So English is not a barrier. Go and contribute there. A lot of non-English speaking people are around this project. Argo CD, that is one of the software build tools, like GitOps, that kind of concept they are doing. Someone want to contribute, you can do it. Otherwise, if you want to contribute to some tools kind of thing, Carvel.dev community, the tool, lot of tools are there. This community is developing. These are all very, I'm not hitting. It's like open source is kind of, we are talking about the universe, the boring universe story, right? And the Earth is a small planet in somewhere in the corner of the universe, that kind of, right? So if you think that analogy is something like that, the open source is a wild thing. So I just put some URLs for your reference. Or if you want to directly contribute to Linux itself, go and refer this thing. But that's a slightly, the learning curves are more because Linux is mostly contributing through C++, right? And the community is looking for more quality of the code and stuff like that. So if you think that, okay, I'm not telling, I don't know, your capability is your capability. So you think that you have that kind of, you want that kind of contribution, go ahead and learn through the Linux kernel patch contribution process, contribute, right? that kind of thing. Good luck. Thank you for this. Thank you for inviting me, as well as sit through this session. Right. So that's it. Any further question? I'm happy to spend some time if you have any question.
Thank you very much, sir, for the interactive session. Actually, there were many industry-related knowledge that we was not familiar with. Thanks for the knowledge shared, and thanks for the encouragement which were given by you to the students.
Thank you. Yeah, you are always welcome. So you can find me in the LinkedIn. Otherwise, have a good weekend. Take care.
Now I would
Yes, sir.
like to invite Maheshwari for the vote of thanks.
Miss, am I audible?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maheshwari and I'm here to present the vote of thanks for today's webinar on open source software, use, learn, contribute and share as a part of Software Freedom Day. I would like to thank our resource person, Mr. Vino Alex, staff Cloud Native Architect VMware. Sir, the session was very informative and we have got more insight into the features and importance of open source softwares and how to use and learn, and get an idea about various important terms related to these open source softwares, so that we have confidence to create our own softwares and contribute in future. Once again, thank you so much, sir, for giving your valuable time. Thank you, our director, Dr. A.V. Alex, and head of department, Ms. Divya PB, for your constant support. Thank you to the faculty coordinators, Ms. Linz Rachel Varghese and Lee Juliet George, for their effort in this. I also thank the School of Computer Applications for arranging this webinar. Last but not least, thank you to all the students and teachers present here for paying your attention. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.